Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Slingin Leather, Southern California's official combat sports show. I am Scuba Steve.
Chino Hernandez.
And Chino, UFC 295 is finally upon us. The undisputed welterweight and flyweight titles will be on the line, and the UFC is closing out the year with arguably one of the most stacked cards of the year in a year that has had some of the most stacked cards I've personally ever seen. Main card starts at 9 p.m. Central and 7 p.m. Pacific for our friends on the West Coast, while the prelims start 5 p.m. Central, 3 p.m. West Coast time. And first fight on the bill was actually canceled with Ian Gary and Vicente Luque due to Ian Gary coming down with an illness, specifically pneumonia. But never to fear, we still have an incredible fight to jerk the curtain for the main card with Josh Emmett, the number 6th rank featherweight contender in the world, taking on the number 10 Bryce Mitchell. And Josh Emmett and Bryce Mitchell are two powerhouses in their own sort of realm. And we've seen Josh Emmett's power on display a lot. You know, he is currently on a 2-fight skid, but he's lost to two of the best guys in the entire division. Yair Rodriguez, who's the former interim champion, as well as Ilia Topuria, who is fighting for the title next. When you have two of these guys that are powerful in their own respects, what does that say to you, Chino? What do you think the deciding factor is with two guys that are really powerful and are looking to implement their game plan?
Yeah, I think it's really just about speed and timing. That's like the main thing that I really, really noticed. Because you can have a lot of power, but if you don't have that timing down, that speed down, then you're not really going to be able to land your shots. Utilize that game plan, using those feints as well, being able to just kind of get your opponent to move his right hand down or his left hand down. Those small things really count down the line. So yeah, I think that's the main thing. If you can get your timing down and really learn to like land your shots, then you're usually gonna get your opponent, even if you don't have much power. Like we saw Devin Haney against oh my gosh, Regis Prograis. Like he just landed his shots, got his timing right, and was able to get the knockdown against him.
Yeah.
So even with a guy with not much power, you're able to see that how much effect that just has on your opponent.
And definitely the case. I mean, Haney did look great in that fight, and especially showed how the timing and the power kind of met in that perfect synergy where they were both able to really, complement one another in his own game, and especially based on what he was trying to do with Regis. And I mean, with this matchup that we got with Emmett and Mitchell, I mean, I would think that Bryce Mitchell has this wrapped up in so many different cases, but with how good Josh Emmett's defensive wrestling is and how good his defense is in keeping the fight standing, especially with Bryce Mitchell not being the best kind of striker, he will have that opportunity to land that one big shot. He will have
Yeah.
that ability to time Mitchell's takedowns and be able to counter accordingly, because he is going to have a pretty significant size advantage. Bryce Mitchell being 5'9", Josh Emmett being 5'6". They will, however, both have a 70-inch reach, which will make it really interesting. I feel like in those instances, do you think that Bryce Mitchell could be vulnerable in those, short in the pocket scenarios especially when he's shooting for a takedown?
It really depends because when you got a short guy like that, it can be a little bit easier to kind of take them down, but also at the same time, they're very elusive. Emmett can maybe use his angles, right? And if he's able to do that, then he can land that one shot to really take his lights out. And as you mentioned, he has that defense down. If Mitchell's not able to get him down to the ground, and considering that his striking is not as well as Emmett, I think we might be looking at a knockout from Emmett, honestly.
I think it's going to be really interesting to see how this is contested, because let's say Bryce Mitchell does take Emmett down and at least is able to hold him there.
Mhm.
I don't know that, even though Bryce Mitchell is an incredible submission artist and he has wins through several avenues as well. I mean, he pounded out Edson Barboza while he was on the ground,
Yeah.
and he's tapped some of the better jiu-jitsu practitioners in the division. I think he's going to have to completely avoid these stand-up scenarios with Emmett, and I mean, do his best to stay on the outside. he doesn't have the reach advantage, so I feel like his kicks are going to have to do a lot of the talking in that
Mm,
regard. And even though Emmett's 38, he's definitely getting older in that division. I can't count him out in this fight entirely. I was really struggling to pick this one. I don't know if you were having the same thoughts, if this was a tough one for you.
yeah, no, I think that if Mitchell can really just knock down the base of Emmett and kind of break him down slowly to the body, the legs, I agree with that, that we can see him just crumble under the pressure. Because like once you break down the base, everything goes falling down. And Emmett is a little bit older as well, but he does have that experience, which is something that a lot of people don't give credit to older fighters. So yeah, no, this is very, very difficult one because if Mitchell's not able to stand up with Emmett and take that power, then we're looking at a knockout. But if Emmett's not able to withstand that, the submissions, the grappling and that sort of thing, then we might be seeing a submission there. So I don't know. I'm really in between this one, but I might have to edge it out to Mitchell just by a very small sliver. I'd say by submission, but even then, we could be looking at a split decision. It's possible.
That was what I was going to say. If Josh Emmett had been more susceptible to submissions in his career, I could feel more confident giving it to Bryce Mitchell. But I mean, I think it's going to be a long, drawn out sort of fight. I think this is going to be one of the more, war kind of fights where they're really going to be going at it tooth and nail, trying to implement their own game plan. But I do see Bryce Mitchell taking this one by decision. I think at some points he will be able to take Josh Emmett down. It's more so, is he going to be able to mount enough offense through ground and pound or submission to really make to make those rounds count? While especially with MMA judging these days, they haven't been valuing the takedown, and they
Yeah.
haven't been valuing the takedown the same as they used to. Like they've
Hmm.
taken into consideration the amount of offense that a fighter does and is able to mount while they're on the ground, while other fighters just kind of get the takedown or laying on top, not really doing much. It was kind of similar to the Bellator fight with Sidney Outlaw and AJ McKee, where Outlaw had the ground control but was getting beat up from the bottom the whole time. So
Mm.
that was one instance. AJ ended up getting that decision because he was able to mount more offense despite being on the bottom. So I mean, if Mitchell's able to make those ground exchanges count, I think it's going to be a good night for him.
Yeah,
Next up, we
agree.
got Tony El Kukui Ferguson, the former interim lightweight champion of the world, taking on one of the hottest stars in mixed martial arts right now, Paddy Pimblett at lightweight. And Paddy Pimblett is coming off one of the most controversial wins I've ever seen, one of the most controversial decisions I've ever witnessed in mixed martial arts. I still vividly remember watching this fight and just being completely beside myself with how the judges rationalized giving him that decision over Jared Gordon. And I don't think there was a soul on planet Earth that thought he actually won that fight in that moment. But he's still a very, very skilled fighter, and he's still got a lot of great attributes. I mean, he's one of the most wild fighters in the entire division. He uses a lot of, flying knees. He has a lot of unorthodox approaches. He has 2 flying triangle submissions in his career. This isn't in the UFC, but it's still something, to look at. When you have a guy
Yeah.
that's so wild and that can create opportunities seemingly out of nowhere against a veteran, do you think that is a good attribute to have, or do you think that's going to play to his detriment?
I see. This is a little bit of a different case because Ferguson is also very wild and unorthodox. I mean, he throws those similar things, flying knees. He'll like do backflips in the octagon. Um, so honestly, if it were another fighter, I think that would be something to look into. But when you're against a guy like Ferguson who's been doing that his whole career, he can anticipate those things. And if I'm being honest, I'm not really convinced about the hype with Paddy Pimblett yet. Like you mentioned, he had a huge controversial win recently, and I don't know. I'm not really convinced yet. I need to see him against higher opponents, and I think Tony Ferguson. I mean, he's obviously been on such a huge decline lately, unfortunately. But you gotta take into consideration this guy's been training with David Goggins, so like,
I was going to ask you about that.
yeah, no,
I was gonna say, when you're putting so much emphasis on cardio rather than technique and stuff. We know Tony is a seasoned veteran. He's been in there with the absolute best of the division. Do you think that it would play to his detriment, especially when his cardio is already some of the best in the entire UFC? Do you think that's going to play to his detriment at all?
Yeah, as much as people joke around about the whole like David Goggins training with Tony Ferguson stuff, I do think that he has to be very careful because I know he did a hell week.
Yeah.
And as an athlete and especially as a fighter, you do not want to overtrain yourself. That's one thing that we've seen happen with like AJ, Anthony Joshua. He's overtrained himself and ended up with a loss against Andy Ruiz. Um, so honestly, I don't know if that was a smart move from Ferguson. I think that when you're in MMA or boxing, you should have your boxing or MMA coaches specifically for whatever you're doing. Because if you have a guy like David Goggins, he doesn't really have knowledge in how to train an MMA fighter. That's mainly it's more a mentality thing. Like if I got through Hell Week, then there's nothing in this world that can possibly take me out that octagon. So I don't know if it was a smart move. I think he did it just for the mental side of things. But again, this guy has amazing cardio, phenomenal. So it's a really interesting fight. I'm honestly torn between these two as well. I don't think it's going to be a knockout. I will say that. I think it's going to full. And is it 5 or 3 rounds?
This one's going to be a 3 round.
Okay, I think it's going to full 3.
Yeah. And I mean, going to be honest, I've been dying for a Tony Ferguson win since
Yep.
2020 now. And despite the fact that I mean, there are literal and obvious instances where we've seen his skills decline, like especially since he got submitted by Bobby Green. If you would have said that Tony Ferguson would later be submitted by Bobby Green, like back in 2018, 2017, when he was at his absolute peak, I think people would be, I mean, they would have looked at you like you were crazy. But I mean, I'm of the firm belief that Tony Ferguson's the type of guy to go on a 6 fight skid just to, callous the loyalty of his fan base. So I mean, I think 7 times, 7 times is the charm. It's gotta be this time. I've been pulling for this for so long. And I think that Tony Ferguson's gonna have enough. I mean, Paddy Pimblett leaves his chin open, unlike any
Yeah.
fighter in the entire UFC. I mean, his defense, you could argue, is the absolute worst. Not maybe not in that division, but maybe the entire UFC because it's simply that bad. And
Yeah.
despite this fact, I think Tony is going to have enough power to at least rock him a few times and interrupt his flow. Again, I think he's going to want to keep this fight standing up. I mean, Bobby Green's not known for his submissions. I mean, the last submission he got before that was, I think, in around 2013 or 2010. Like, so, I think it may have been in Strikeforce. It had been a really long time since he had
Mhm.
gotten that. So I'm really concerned if Tony does end up taking this to the ground or chooses to engage on the ground with Patty. But I mean, I think he could do well enough on the feet and, wear him out, use his cardio, use his elbows because we haven't seen that nearly enough. I mean, he elbowed Michael Chandler once off the bottom and opened up a cut on him so bad. Of course, he got knocked out in that fight, but I mean, that's beside the
Yeah.
point. I think I think it's still going to be I think it's going to be a good showing for El Kukui, or at least I'm really hoping it's going to be a good showing for El Kukui. I personally have him winning the fight by TKO. I think he could potentially get it done, even if it's like by a doctor stoppage sort of thing. Where I mean, if he opens some really bad cuts on Patty, I think it could be up to the doctor or something. But I mean, I see Tony matching up better with him than many of the other fighters he's had fought previously.
Yeah, no, I will say Patty looked phenomenal on the scale. Like he's in shape for this fight.
Mm-hmm.
Tony, on the other hand, he has more of a body, like you can tell he does a lot of cardio because he's very slim in that aspect. So, you know, maybe this is just a fan of me for Tony Ferguson, but I'd have to agree. I have Ferguson, but I think it's gonna be decision rather than on TKO. I don't see him knocking out Patty, but it could end up being controversial for Patty again. I think that those are the two possibilities, either Ferguson by decision or Patty by a controversial decision. So, but I'm gonna be rooting for Ferguson.
Yeah, I mean, with how egregious his last decision is, I feel like he's clearly kind of that industry plant, like sort of like homegrown star that they're trying, to make sure he
Yeah,
gets to, the top 15 and the top echelon of the division unscathed. But I mean, if it is going to be a Tony TKO, I mean, it's going to be in the third round at the very latest, and it's going to be an onslaught sort of thing. It's not going to be a one punch knockout, but
yeah, no,
gotta
we're
root for
gonna
Tony.
see. Yeah, we're gonna see Patty get bloodied up. I think that's one thing, and we're gonna see how he handles all that. I mean, when you see your own blood gushing out of your forehead or your body or whatever your face, I don't think I've seen Patty like beat up like that yet. So I'm kind of curious to see how he's gonna handle that when he's against Tony. So
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a litmus test for the toughness of Paddy Pimblett, but it's going to be a great fight. I feel like a lot of people are sleeping on that fight or thinking it's going to be boring. I think it's going to be one of the better ones on the card. But
agree.
next up, we have one of the biggest undefeated prospects in the welterweight division, Shavkat Rakhmonov, the number 5 ranked welterweight in the world, taking on the grizzled veteran and former two-time title challenger Stephen Thompson at welterweight. We got Rakhmonov 17-0, one of the most well-rounded fighters maybe we've ever seen in the UFC. He has 9 wins by submission and 8 by TKO, so it's almost a perfect split with how many wins he's had. None of his fights have ever gone the distance. He is a finisher to the core, and he even has the dynamic striking to keep up with someone like Stephen Thompson, who's in his 40s but looked tremendous in his last fight. Stephen Thompson is known for his ability to avoid the takedown, while Shavkat has done pretty well taking people to the ground. When you're at that age, when you're at 40 years old now for Stephen Thompson, and you're taking on, a young, super hype prospect who has ran through virtually everyone they've put in front of him. What kind of pressure does that put on you as the elder? Do you think this is something where you're trying to still see if you have it, or is this more of a I'm getting back into this title picture and this is how I'm going to do it?
I mean, if you're fighting a guy like that, I think it's more he's trying to back into that title picture. But I mean, he's gotta have some mental like maybe he's gotta play like a mental game inside of his head because if you're facing a guy like that and you're obviously much older than you were, you're not in your prime. You might have come off of a great win against Kevin Holland, but I don't know. I This guy, like you mentioned, none of his fights have or no wins by decision. Every single one of his fights have been KO, TKO, or submission, which is something that you really cannot count out. Absolutely not.
And I mean, with this fight, I feel like everything on paper says that this should go to Rachmanov in like without a second thought. But with how hard Stephen Thompson has become to hit, or how hard he's always been to hit in his career, it makes me think that if he avoids the big shots and is able to avoid the takedown, you think he could be the first guy to take him the distance?
It's definitely possible. And I think if it goes a distance, then I'd probably give it to Steven Thompson just because I mean he has that experience. He knows how to handle those rounds. It kind of lasts the whole fight. Um Obviously he's much older, but experience plays a huge role. And you've seen this time and time again with veterans being able to beat these up and coming guys. And that's just because they have experience. I mean, like you mentioned, he has that head movement. He's able to like really move out the way. He's very elusive, very slippery, hard to hit. When you got a guy like that, it's kind of interesting to see how Shafkat just reacts to that, if he just takes him to the ground or if he continues to try to knock him out. Because I think at some point he might get frustrated and just probably go for the takedown. And then we'll see how Stephen Thompson reacts to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be real interesting. I'm pulling up their topology right now because I'm curious how large the reach discrepancy is. Shavkat Rakhmonov, especially, he's a huge welterweight. He's 6'2" and has a 77-inch reach, which is already
Wow.
huge for the welterweight division. And then you have Stephen Thompson, who's 6 foot tall with a 75-inch reach. which again, I don't think that type of difference is going to be the end all be all. I mean, with how good Stephen Thompson is with darting in and out, using his front leg side kick, using his leg kicks, and using his range and his timing. I still maintain he has the best timing in all of mixed martial arts still at his age, because I mean his ability to counter is just, he's so accurate every single time. And the only person that I really could think has that level of timing is Alex Pereira, is that, you know, championship level kickboxer who has spent all that time developing their striking timing. And I still think that Stephen Thompson has a great chance in this fight to do well and still show that he has the, you know, the experience and still the ability and the speed to execute. But I just think since he's failed against smaller grapplers like Gilbert Burns and Bilal Muhammad in comparison to Shavkat, it makes me think that he may struggle really heavily with Shavkat's wrestling, even if he's able to get it there.
Yeah, no, I agree. And because of that, and you just look at the guy's record. I mean, this guy, it seems like he has it all. He's able to submit you and knock you out. That's a dangerous man right there. So honestly, even on paper, I mean, on paper, this guy should win, but I do believe that he will win. And unfortunately for Stephen Thompson, I think that this might be maybe a close to his career, or he's probably going to have to kind of consider things, whether he wants to move forward with the UFC or what he's going to want to do afterwards.
Unfortunately, it sounds like that may have to be the case, especially he's 40 years old. I mean, he's still in incredible shape. He doesn't look like the typical 40-year-old fighter where they're, you know, falling apart at the seams. But I mean, I just don't see Rakhmonov taking this loss. I mean, I think it's going to be really hard to finish Stephen Thompson. I mean, he hasn't been submitted. So if I had to put my money on it, I would put, say, Rakhmonov by decision. But again, that's going to take a relentless pursuit for the takedown that I think he is capable of, but I do think it is still going to be pretty tough for him.
Yeah, and what do you think if he makes it easy? Let's say Shafkat is able to either knock him out or submit him really easily. Would you think of, obviously he's a threat, but would you see it rather like Steven Thompson is more older, like he's just out of his prime, or would you see it as this guy is like a huge threat, massive threat?
I think that since Stephen Thompson is one of the hardest puzzles to solve in all of mixed martial arts, this win will carry merit regardless of what method he gets it done. If he gets it done on the feet, I think it's just going to be title shot worthy type thing. I mean, Bilal Muhammad has the next title shot based on a lot of people's assessment and based on how the welterweight division is kind of trending right now. I mean, he deserves the next title shot. But after that, you're really going to have to look closely at Shavkat Rakhmonov if he's going to get this fight done on the feet, and especially doing it in a devastating fashion if he does it like that. But I mean, if he does it through the grappling, I don't think it's going to carry quite as much weight and quite as much merit. But I still think it's going to be a feather in the cap of Shavkat that he was able to take down one of the hardest guys to take down in the UFC.
Absolutely. Agreed.
Who do you got for this one, Edgar?
I have Shafkat by either, I won't say KO or something. I'll just say either one of those. KO submission. I can't really pin it. Yeah.
There you
Definitely
go.
by finish though.
Nice. Nice. I mean, it's going to be a great fight, especially like if Stephen
Absolutely.
Thompson's able to get this, if he's able to take the, oh, what is that going to look like? That would be incredible to watch. Like
Yeah.
seeing that he still got it and like fighting either Leon or Colby for the title. I mean, I feel like that would be just an incredible story.
Inspirational.
Definitely. In the co-main event, we have the defending, reigning, undisputed flyweight title holder. Oh, wow, that was great. Undisputed flyweight champion Alessandro Pantoja taking on the number 3 ranked Brandon Royval for the second time. This is the second time these two have matched up. And Pantoja just put on arguably one of the most high-level title fights in UFC history. It's probably the most high-level UFC fight that I've personally ever seen. Just the level of how detailed the striking was and how advanced the ground exchanges were. I mean, it was just so incredible to watch. And he's taking on a guy that he has previously submitted. but he's taking on a guy that is so different from any other fighter in the flyweight division. Brandon Royval is big. I mean, he's big for the flyweight division. He's 5'9", has a 70 and a half inch reach, while Alessandro Pantoja is 5'5" with a 2.5 inch reach disadvantage. Maths. 68-inch reach. And I think this is going to be a very, very interesting rematch. I think a lot of people are counting out Royval in this for the fact that he did get submitted in the second round in their previous fight. I mean, despite the fact that 61% of fighters that rematch, 61% of victors in the first fight of any rematch fight go on to win the second one. Do you think that this kind of plays the same, especially if it's like 3, 4, 5 years apart?
Um, I'm not too sure about this one. I mean, Royval probably knowing that he's been in the octagon with Pantoja, he kind of has that feel for him. He knows how he fights. Um, but then again, I mean, this guy has elevated to another level. I mean, he beat Moreno good, and I was very sad. That's my guy. I love Moreno so much, but I mean, you got to give credit where it's due. He went to another level that I haven't seen in any time recently. So honestly, I think that it's probably just gonna be a repeat. Roy Vol is good and he's an interesting fighter for sure, but I don't think that he's able to crack that code. He might have the height advantage, and the reach advantage, but it's gonna be kind of interesting to see how if he's able to kind of change his game plan and kind of figure him out. But I don't really see that happening.
And yeah, especially with someone who's so good at the fundamentals and so good at being a technical fighter, a wild fighter like Royval, it's really hard for someone to have that wild sort of approach work, especially with all the flying stuff and all the spinning stuff that he has the tendency to throw. I feel like with a guy like Pantoja, who is one of the best grapplers in the UFC, will certainly be able to take those opportunities, especially where he's being wild, to transition to the ground. And Brandon Royval is good on the ground in his own right. He's still a very talented grappler who has shown that against some of the best fighters in the division, like Kai Kara France. But it's one of those matchups where it feels like Pantoja's bread and butter is too good for anything for Brandon Royval to, spice it up with or change the pace of or kind of disrupt the flow of Alessandro Pantoja. I think that's just going to be too much for him. And especially with how high level Pantoja fought in his previous fight, I thought that the fight before that, Brandon Moreno versus Davison Figueiredo 3, was the most high level UFC fight that I had ever seen. And then just to come back and see Pantoja make Moreno better while still proving how good he is. I think this dude's one of the best out there right now. Like just in terms of raw
Yep.
skill. There was a discussion happening on the countdown show today where they were basically doing some like quick fire questions, and one thing that came up is the flyweight division presenting the most action packed title fights in the UFC. I don't think it's even a question right now. I mean, what they've been doing as of late has just been so incredibly high level and so detailed that I feel like it's undeniable. Daniel Cormier says it's heavyweights, and say what you will about heavyweights, say what you will about you saw the Tom Aspinall knockout, you saw how incredible that
Yep.
was. It's not like that was an action packed, but the lack of power in flyweight makes everyone so much better because they got to be so well rounded and so good at all over the place that I feel like with a guy like Alessandro Pantoja, it's just on display every fight. I mean,
Absolutely. And also you got the speed too. That's something that heavyweights versus flyweights. Flyweights have that speed, so they have to really, really knock down that timing. Because if they don't pin that timing, then that could end the fight or even submit, you know. But man, these guys are such high level. It would be interesting to see a heavyweight with that same level of like IQ. I don't think we'll ever
oh yeah.
see that, but it would be crazy if we had like a fighter who had that IQ.
If it's anyone, I'd say it's either Aspinall or maybe Jailton Almeida. But I mean, Jailton's got to prove himself from his previous fight. He basically did nothing.
Yeah.
But to circle back to Pantoja versus Royval, I do see Pantoja getting this one done by decision. I think Royval's has worked pretty tirelessly to ensure that his submission defense is where it needs to be, but I just don't see him creating enough opportunities off his back because he is going to get taken down in this fight. And is he able to keep Pantoja off his back? I mean, next to Aljamain Sterling, Pantoja is the human backpack. So, I mean, he's that good on the ground. So, I mean, I have Pantoja getting this one done by decision.
Yeah, I have him getting it done by either decision or submission.
I mean, it's going to be a great fight. I hope this lives up to what every flyweight title fight has been since the very first Brandon Moreno and Davison Figueiredo fight. I mean, since 2020, it's just the flyweight division's been on fire. And just before that, having it almost be completely axed from the UFC, I mean, it's just great to see. Especially great to see it live up to its full potential. And
Absolutely.
now, the main event of the evening, the champion, headshot dead, the man himself, Leon Edwards, will be taking on the number 3 ranked welterweight in the world, Kobe Covington, for the welterweight title. And I didn't expect this fight week to be filled with so much animosity, but with the way Colby Covington acted in this past press conference we had yesterday, I mean, I feel like it took it from 0 to 100 in no time flat.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it was the father comment, what he said about Leon's father. When I heard that, I was like, oh no, it could be bad for Leon though, because I mean Kobe is getting in his head, and when you
Mm-hmm.
fight on emotions, you tend to make more mistakes. So maybe Kobe is smart for saying these things, but is it right? Absolutely not. But man, he has been getting into Leon's head. I mean, wow, pure entertainment with these press conferences.
Oh yeah. And I just knew this press conference was going to be all over the place. I mean, you got Tony, you got Patty, you got Colby, and you got Leon. I mean, I just think it was bound to be like fireworks, but it was like, I mean, he was going after Ian Gary with his wife. I mean, and that whole controversy that's been going on. I mean, he went
Yeah.
after Tony for no reason, and then they just ended up like being
Yeah.
like they were just like
I was really
it was
confused
all
about
over the
that.
place because I mean his trash talk isn't even that good, but it gets a reaction. I feel like that's what excels, and I think Henry Cejudo had mentioned that I think that he thinks that the way that he approached that press conference was to make Leon Edwards fight emotionally and want to go forward. And especially
Yeah.
with a wrestler like Colby Covington, that's kind of what you want. I mean, you don't want to be on the back foot at all times, but you want those opportunities to present themselves. I mean, despite having no wins in the top 15 right now, considering Masvidal is out and Usman, I mean, he never beat Usman, and Usman's technically up at 185. I don't know what that whole situation looks like, but he's still one of the best at wrestling. And I mean, I think once you have that, in the head factor, once you have that mental sort of block in your opponent, you could sort of wait for them to tire out. Again, Leon Edwards is a great gas tank. But how effective do you think do you think the mental game is going to be in this fight?
It could be everything. It really can be. I think that's the one thing we see in fighting sports that we don't often see in maybe other sports as much is that mentality because you really are being pushed through those deep waters. You're getting all bloodied up, exhausted. I mean, that's what makes fighting unique from other sports because this is really life or death. You don't go
Mm-hmm.
in there thinking, "Oh, I'm gonna kick a ball or I'm gonna shoot this ball into the net." Like you go in there thinking like I'm really gonna kill this guy or I'm gonna get killed. So this is really, you really have to have that mentality down. You can't be a fighter with having a soft mentality.
And yeah, and Leon Edwards has never struck me as the person to get too wrapped up in what someone else has to say. I mean, even when Usman was trying to get into his head, like saying he got bullied for 3 out of 5 rounds, I mean 3 out of 4 rounds in their first fight, it really just didn't seem to phase him. But I mean, the way he reacted just kind of it started to get me to think a little bit. But I digress because Leon Edwards is still one of the most calculated and most thoughtful fighters in the welterweight division. I think that's what makes him so good, because he transitioned to being one of the best kickboxers, one of the best pure kickboxers in the division, to being a completely well-rounded fighter who has that ability to defend the takedown and has the ability to maintain top pressure and threaten with submissions, as we saw in the first Usman fight in the first round. But it's one of those things where I think it's going, that thoughtfulness and that approach and those tendencies that he already has is going to be too much for a volume fighter like Colby Covington. He has that smothering pressure, and he has incredible takedowns and incredible ability to wear his opponents out. But it's just Leon's ability to operate in those scenarios where Colby transitions into his strengths, where he's shooting, where he's getting up like and trying to pressure you towards the fence. Leon Edwards off like with his back to the fence are some of the most lethal in the UFC. We saw that in the second Usman fight, and we saw that in the Cerrone fight. We saw that in a few of his other performances. But despite the fact he has struggled with high volume and high pressure fighters like Kamaru Usman and Nate Diaz, I don't see this being the case against Colby, because he's fought all these guys in such quick succession. He has that sort of blueprint down. Do you think that sort of mutual style, or that succession of fighters that all have a similar approach, being a big reason as to why Leon could do well in this fight?
Yeah, you've seen his experience. This guy jumped from fighter to fighter and each a different level. Leon beat Usman twice. First time people thought, okay, it was a fluke. Second time, you saw him defending takedowns from Usman, which Usman is such a phenomenal wrestler. Um, and Kobe hasn't really beat a top name like that. I think that's one thing that really plays a role in this fight. Kobe, he has that hype behind him, and love him or hate him, he is a very good wrestler, and we saw with the Usman fight. That was just a brawl, and that's something that we could possibly be seeing in this fight because we know Leon can defend those takedowns. So I don't think Kobe's gonna really be able to take him down, or if he does, I think he's gonna struggle to keep him down. As for Leon, he's more the well-rounded fighter. He's able to fight on the back foot. And he's very elusive. He's really able to trick you. You saw the way he head kicked Usman. He blocked his eyesight and then boom, leg kick out of nowhere.
Yeah.
So honestly, I don't know if Kobe's gonna be able to really get through that. Even if he's able to pressure him a lot, Leon has that timing. He has that phenomenal striking. And I think that is really going to play such a huge role. And also the experience within his past opponents versus Kobe. I mean, Leon should realistically be able to get him out there.
And I think, especially with how much he's developed in his last few fights, I feel like he's really coming into that sort of championship mentality with that championship game plan, where if he's able to avoid this takedown, I don't see any way Colby being able to out pressure him or gas him out throughout this fight. And I think Edwards' counters, and I think his especially diverse striking is going to pay dividends in this fight. And that leads me to pick him via TKO. I think this is a good fight for Leon. I think it's a great matchup. And if Colby is somehow going to get this win, I think it's going to be fought. He's going to have to fight tooth and nail for this takedown, and he's going to have to pray that Leon gets tired quickly and fights emotionally.
Yeah, agreed. And I think that's why Kobe's taking that route of, going after his father and that sort of thing. He wants him to fight on emotions because this is his best bet. He needs Leon to make those small mistakes so that he can really capitalize on that end. I mean, his best bet is probably taking Leon out of there. He's gonna have to do to Leon what Leon did to Usman. So yeah,
I think that's
I was gonna say, I agree. I got Leon by TKO.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be a great fight still. Every time we watch Colby fight, it's not like he's a snoozer, like he's going to sit on the back foot. I still feel like it's going to be an incredible night of fights. As we mentioned earlier, main card starts at 9 p.m. Central, 7 o'clock Pacific for our friends on the West Coast. Thank you all for tuning in to Slingin Leather. Be sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons for more of Southern California's official combat sports show, as well as follow us on Twitter and Instagram, where the links will be in the description. Remember to protect yourself at all times, and we hope you all enjoy UFC 296. Well, and we'll see you in the next one.
Peace.